Okay, well, I didn't know I had this kicking around. This is Autumn of Glory, the fourth of the... This was actually the first one I ever played of the campaign, the American Civil War campaign games. Well, this is the last one I have. This is volume 7 of the series. So apparently I'm missing some. Not sure. I thought I went out on my way to try to grab them all, and I don't know what's going on with that numbering. These were the ones I was aware of. I'll have to go look that up. But this was the one that I first played many years ago. My friend Nick, he had gotten a copy of this. This was the only one he had. We gave it a try. I was a little intrigued by it, but it's very hard for me to learn games playing them opposed with people, and I didn't get a chance to fiddle around with it solo, and I was a little confused, but you know, I remembered seeing some things that were interesting about it, and when Judd Vance kind of recommended the system, you know, I thought I had to give that another shot, and that's when I started hunting them down. And I think this was the last one I got. I actually bid on it in an auction, thinking I didn't have it because I couldn't find it when I looked at the others. And what's really cool about this is, in addition to Lee Takes Command, it has a Grant Takes Command scenario. We're going to find some problems with this one. For example, these mule train counters, which are an optional rule. The optional rule is not in this set of rules, and I looked online and I can't find it there either, and well, it would really be useful here. This is going to be featuring the Chickamauga Campaign. Now, this is interesting because Chickamauga, I'm sure I paid some attention to it back when I was in like 7th grade or whatever, and I was really super into American history still, and probably when I was first getting into the American Civil War in any depth. But I've kind of not paid any attention to it because I don't have many games on Chickamauga, and I had none for the longest time. I see I have one there from West End, and I'm assuming this terrible sound is one. It's Baron Victory. Yeah, Baron Victory was, and I played that out. That was kind of small. Okay. But that was also a fairly recent acquisition, so it hasn't really been heavily on my mind as a campaign, and reading the historical narrative on this made it very interesting. This isn't going to be a regular intro. I'm hoping we can push through it pretty quickly in terms of the special rules. I did have to familiarize myself with the standard rules again a little bit. Yes, this was the last thing I was playing before I did Stellar Horizons, but that was a huge game that I wasn't expecting to be anywhere near as big as it was. I also didn't think I was coming back. I mean, if I was coming back to play these, which are kind of a pain to, or one of those, which is kind of a pain to sort out, and I'm still kind of like, geez, how do I mix this in with that, and what do I do? I'm not sure about the logistics of getting those counters that apply to 2 different games and keeping track of them. I'm probably going to have to mark the counters somehow. Okay. What's special about this one? Well, a lot. There's a lot going on in this one that's a little different. First of all, looky. There's like this off-board section. This is the board. This is also the map, and plays by the same kind of rules, more or less, but with much larger areas involved, and we'll see how that's handled. But yeah, this is a much larger campaign than you would normally see in these games. Okay. Pregame activities. The Confederate player throws 3 red chips in a cup. Well, I think I've got them buried over here. And they're going to get a random set of reinforcements. Now, what's kind of interesting is the Confederate commander, Braxton Bragg, was not informed that of exactly what was coming. And, you know, in the game, he's got 3 levels of reinforcements that can come in. And he doesn't find out till then, and the Union never finds out except through experience of what the Confederates have on the board. It will impact the victory conditions, so it's kind of like optional picks in the CWB series, except you're forced into them, which I like. Okay. And then they set up what you're gonna what is available depending on the chit you pick. And if you get a chit that's not the full reinforcements, instead of reinforcements, you get some dummy counters, which are going to help you, conceal the fact that you had reinforcements. That's a little weaker, and you got to be real careful with this because dummy counters can't spawn dummy counters under the rules, and so if you're bringing reinforcements in, you probably don't want to spawn dummy counters because you're going to give away some information then. Okay, we got our normal Army commanders and our Army, overall commanders, and then you have officers as the two different kinds of leaders. The Union chain of command, they come in with two armies. The Army of the Cumberland, with Rosecrans in charge, and with a series Thomas, McCook, Crittenden, and Granger, and then some secondary replacement leaders, including Sheridan, and Palmer. I'm used to him. And then Burnsides has the Army of Ohio, and he has Hard Stuff and possible replacement of Manson. The Confederate command is much more confusing. Now, the Army of the Ohio, I think, gets integrated into the Union command, and I may be mistaking that. It may be only the Confederates who do that. So let me shut up about that, because there are rules to make them not coordinate well. Okay, the Confederates have Braxton Bragg, and he has a series of leaders from the Western Army, but he also has some troops from the Army of Northern Virginia. And some of the optional rules some of the optional counters have to do with, like, General Lee showing up with the whole, or most of the Army of Northern Virginia, which, again, I don't have rules for that, I just have counters, I really don't like that policy. I understand, hey, it's easier to deliver the counters with the game, but come on, you really want people to buy your Art of War anal or whatever it is. Jeez. I hate that as a marketing ploy, and those special rules are not printed online. Even now, 20 years afterwards, I would pay $10-15 if Clash of Arms re-released, a booklet of all the ones for this series, a special for the series. There's no such thing that I'm aware of. Okay. And maybe they could package it up with some more stuff and make it a neat little group. But this series is basically dead, as far as I know, and long dead. So nobody's supporting it in that way. Unlike GMT games, some of which just last forever. Okay, Confederate chain of command. Okay, the Confederate chain of command is represented over here with these corps leaders. Now, some of them are primary corps leaders, and they must be assigned troops before any of the non-primaries can be assigned troops. They do not follow a normal structure. Like in most of these games, you have a corps, you have a commander of the corps, and he's in charge of his units all the time. Here, no, you're allowed to kind of shift the troops around, because Bragg managed to do that and completely disrupt his command by rearranging them. Let's see what we got here. The primary corps commanders are Polk, D.H. Hill, Buckner, Walker, and Longstreet. These cannot be voluntarily removed from play, and they must have at least one division to command, except if they are subordinated to another available primary corps officer who assumes control of a wing. Well, that is in contradiction to some other rules, so I'm not sure how to deal with that. We'll go on a little later, but it appears they can be off the board sometimes. Okay, If killed, a primary corps officer's units may be assigned to another primary corps officer, or he may be replaced by promoting one of the senior division officers whose division is assigned to that corps officer. And then we have a list of those divisional officers. And then there's an Army of Tennessee replacement. Now, if the Army of Northern Virginia reinforcements are in the game, Hood can replace Longstreet, and if they're both gone, there's a special Army of North Virginia replacement officer. I don't know what happens if you start losing too many officers. We'll hope that we don't. I probably can use some other secondary. Okay. For the Union, you have corps. There's 5 corps in the game, and they are all locked in as they are normally in this game, and you need them for your line of communications in order to move and fight effectively. For the Confederates, they also have corps, but their corps are defined on the fly. Confederate infantry units and officers don't have a formation identifier. There can be up to 11 of them, as shown on there. No, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, so these 2 are replacements, so they're not a problem. AP Hill, isn't it? Hardy is not real. So Hardy's corps does not actually exist. That's not present, but it's available perhaps as an option. So yeah, there's 11 different corps that are available under the basic game. But you could go down to as few as 2 wings, depending on how the Confederate player wants to organize their army. Regardless of what corps structure the Confederate player finally adopts, the normal stacking for line positions in the battlefield is in play. Dummies are restricted to the number of units that you have on... You have a number of dummy cav equal to the number of real cav you have on play. You can use dummy infantry equal to half the number of real infantry you have in play. However, if the Confederates get crappy reinforcements, they get some bonus dummies for as long as those kind of work. Okay. Terrain and off-board, and what they don't do is say that you get additional dummies, maybe in addition to the ones that are covering the units that you would be getting. Maybe I'd want to change that too, but I'm not too worried. Okay, the off-board display. This is the new thing that's completely there. And there's special rules. Lookout Mountain, or otherwise known as Look Mountain, Area 32. Well, I don't think that's here, right? Area 32 is on here. So why is that here? Here's Lookout Mountain. Okay. Oh, that's 41. Gotcha. There's separated rules, and I'm like off-board display and this. Okay, Lookout Mountain has special rules. If it's unoccupied by the enemy, the friendly units can move and trace supply and communications from Wauhatchie to Chattanooga, I guess through the rail gap, without any interference. Counting the entire distance traversed as 1, because so you can't, you don't have troops here, you can't interfere then, and this distance is not that far, so they're considered sort of adjacent for that. Okay, the off-board display is a number of boxes connected by lines. Each box is the same as an area on the map, even though it's bigger, but it's the same but different. You can only move between them if they're connected by either a road or a rail line. Well, otherwise they wouldn't make much sense because they're just floating out there unlike areas. All units can move no more than 1 box per turn on the OBD. No force marching is permitted. You can only move on a road or rail line to an adjacent box. You cannot skip boxes. You can enter or leave from the OBD onto the map in the areas that are numbered, and those numbers correspond to the area that they're next to, I hope. So here's 63, that's over here. 26 is up here. and then this kind of curves around over the top. So you've got area 5 up here, and these others, I'm assuming they're 17 and 18, and 7 and 8 are running, in that corner up there. To give you kind of an image. So this is kind of facing that way more, but whatever. I may need to do something for my sanity with that. Okay. Each area is one area for tracing command, movement, etc. You can fight over on the ODB. Everything is assumed to contain defensible terrain. Combat occurs normally with units moving into the enemy area and declaring combat. If they cross the Tennessee or other major river indicated there, well, yeah, I think anything that shows up on their counts, then they do normal major river crossings. The rough terrain on the map may only be entered or exited versus road or via road or rail, joining the rough terrain to an adjacent area. Lines of communication and supply can only be traced via road or rail on the rough areas. Now let me, as usual, a very good historical commentary with some bent. He is very kind to both generals here. So rough is this kind of hilly type thing. I always have trouble understanding the terrain in this game. Defensible, anything with defensible terrain, good God. Okay, so this I think is defensible. This is defensible. This is rough, I think, because it has all these little curves in it. This is, of course, rough. I'm going to have trouble distinguishing, as I always do with these Barber maps. They're problematic. Okay. Special rules on lines of communication and supply. Supplies, we had that in the last time, didn't we? Lines of communication. Normally you have to do normal lines of communication. The Union player has 2 different armies which have different line of communication locations. The Army of the Cumberland starts out at home in area 9 over here. After turn 7, it is also in area 50. Okay. There's more rules on that. The Army of the Cumberland units occupying the areas on the OBD have to trace back to the area on the map as well. If and when the Union player solely occupies 33 Chattanooga, area 33 must become the only Union home area. And there's a marker, one of these guys up here, that'll indicate that. The Union player must now trace their line of communications from Rosecrans to area 33. In this case, they can no longer go back to areas 9 and 50. If area 33 becomes mutually controlled, that's not a problem. But if it's ever captured, that is a problem. The Union is still using this as their supply base, and now they're all out of supply. And as they put it, you will probably lose the game if you do this. The Army of Ohio is centered here on Montgomery. If and when it solely occupies Knoxville, down here, that becomes the Army of Ohio's new home area, and there's a marker for that. Line of communication is from Burnside to whichever is the area. The Union player need not trace the line of communication to Montgomery any longer. Need not, not cannot. That's a different wording. Interesting. Knoxville can become mutually controlled. If the Union player loses Knoxville, he may not revert back to using Montgomery. Okay. In which case, he will probably be out of supply. It doesn't say he'll lose the game for that, though. It's not automatic here either. It's just the effects. In any cases, infantry occupying the victory areas must be able to trace to a line of communication to their officer, from the officer to the general in command of the army, and then from that commanding the commander back to the Union home area. This is standard rules, except there's some movement of where they go. It gets more complicated. For the Confederates, their initial home area is Area 61. Whoa, where's this 39? That's got a star on it. That must be a victory point area. 61, where is that? That's here, Ringwald. Another victory point area. Interesting. Okay. If this is lost, the Confederates can switch to 106 Rome down here, and they again have a marker to indicate that they've switched to there. And this has not that, but this does. Okay, I'm looking because there's a star here. Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so all of the places that you can trace supply from, other than the starting Union ones, have a star, which means they're Union victory point areas, which makes sense, but I was worried that it wasn't the case. Confederate units and officers on the OBD have to be able to trace to Bragg in order to avoid the penalties if there's no line of communication. Oh, maybe there's nothing special about the Army of Northern Virginia for this. Lines of supply. Okay, lines of supply, we saw them in the last game. Let's see if they're the same. I don't know if I'll remember. But here, the Army of Cumberland was dependent on pack-borne mule train until it could make use of the Tennessee River. And the Army of Tennessee had a general problem with reinforcements showing up without logistical support and without enough wagons to begin with. Okay, infantry and artillery have to be able to trace a line of supply in order to fight at full effectiveness. A line of supply is similar to a line of communications. It's traced during the communications phase, and you get an out of supply marker, and we have some of those up there. If it's out of supply, it remains so until the next communication phase. They can be traced independently. So the Union Army of Supply for infantry and artillery for the Cumberland is they have to trace a line of supply from the area containing the unit back to the unit's home area, 6 areas or less. The Union Army of the Ohio is in supply if they can trace a line of supply from the unit to the home area of 4 areas or less. Now remember, they're on a bigger scale. But what's kind of weird is the Army of the Cumberland can trace out here more extensively than you might think possible. It's not going to go very far though, because these are not close to the board. Area 5 is here, so you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4. We could make it pretty damn far, actually. But this map is not much bigger than one of these, so it's not that big a deal. Okay. If Chattanooga is the Army of Cumberland's new home area, the line of supply for the Cumberland goes up to 7. If Knoxville is the Army of Ohio's new home area, they do remain at 4. For the Confederates depend on the reinforcement chip picked. At the start of the game, their infantry and artillery are in supply if they can trace back to their home area 7 areas or less. If they get a minimum chip pick, that drops down to 6 areas or less. If they get a moderate chip pick, that drops to 6 areas on turn 8, and then when you get the chit, I think, and then to 5 areas on turn 12 for the rest of the game. And if you get a maximum chit pick, it drops to 6 on turn 8, 5 on turn 12, and then 4 on turn 17. And the reason here is because the Army of Northern Virginia units are showing up without wagons, and they've got to rely on the already strained Confederate supply system. Knoxville can be a spare home area for supply purposes. and that may be why it's kind of this pale gray, provided the Confederate player can trace a special line of communication along the rail line running from Knoxville to Ringgold or Rome. Okay, Ringgold and Rome are these two. So basically, if you've got this rail line going back to the map and then to their supply center on map, you're okay. Units are in supply if all the boxes on the OBD and the areas on the map are connected by the rail line free of Union units. If they are in 1/2 the LLS ranges above of Knoxville. So your base was what, 8 areas? 7 areas. Yeah. So early on, it's going to be only 3 boxes of there, within 3 boxes of there, which means I can't be in supply here very easily, except Ringgold is close to there. Right? 26 and 63. Well, 63 is here. 26, there is nothing near Rome, is there? Rome is down in the hundreds, and there is just nothing there. So even though there's a rail line going off here, I'm not sure where it connects to on this map. Interesting. It connects this way. That's how it connects on that map. So if you give up Ringgold, you are probably cutting that supply off. Unless you give it up and you still hold a defensive posture up there. Okay, so that makes sense. The line of supply is traced from an area containing the unit back to the area containing the home area. It must follow a road back to the home area, except for the area the unit is occupying, and may only cross major rivers at crossing points with a road or rail line. The line of supply is reduced by 1 when there's rain. Out of supply. If you're not in supply, you can't force march, you can't recover stragglers. You take a penalty when rolling on the straggler table. Your combat strength is halved, and this could result in multiple halvings. Cavalry units, garrison units, and leaders are not affected by supply. Yay! Okay. Special rules. Let me take a little break, but each of the armies has its own special rules. And yeah, this is one of the more complicated sets of special rules for these games. Okay. So, during Chickamauga, the Union Army collapsed. In order to do this, in any combat situation where the Union player is the defender, and the Army of the Cumberland is in line positions and reserve, and all units from the Army of the Cumberland are in the battle. 40 or more strength points, current face value. This is units from the Army of the Cumberland and reserve are in the battle. Oh no, I'm sorry. And units from the Army of the Cumberland in the Union line positions and the battle board total 40 or more strength points total. The Union player must roll a die to see if they're screwed. Their orders, the army breaks, basically. After both sides have completed their battle board deployment and have chosen and placed their combat orders, the Union player announces if he's eligible for a collapse, he rolls a die. On a 1 or a 2, he has to change one of his line positions' combat orders to withdrawal. The Union player has to place the withdrawal order in one that does not already have a withdrawal order. The player, hey, maybe pick withdrawal with all your armies and see what happens. All your units and see what happens. Players then execute the first combat round. All the Union line positions eligible to be attacked by any Confederate line position, even if they're not adjacent, so long as no line position attacks more than once. Not is attacked more than once. The line position that collapsed executes the combat round in accordance with normal rules as though it's a withdrawal order. At the conclusion of the round, the Union line position that collapsed executes its withdrawal order in accordance with standard rules. Units in reserve can withdraw along with it. I think they can also reinforce into that space. But if the center wing collapses, the reserve may occupy the center wing. Yeah, you can throw reserves in. Otherwise, if a second round is declared and no units are in reserve, the Union player has to shift all their units from one of the two wings into the center to be a new center. The Confederates are not allowed to shift forces, and this may turn out that a single line position is now opposed by 3 attacking line positions. This wouldn't normally be allowed. If the defender only picks 1 line position, you can only be in 2. But in this case, it's permitted. That may open up some additional questions, like what happens if the defender withdraws with some of their lines and puts you in an illegal position. And I would suggest it's the same situation. There shouldn't be a special rule for this. That this actually should be covered in the rules. If the Union does not collapse in the first round, not that I've ever seen it, so in the first round, and a second round is declared, he might collapse then as well. Once a collapse occurs, the Union doesn't have to roll anymore, but he has to roll each time he's eligible until it happens at least once. Well, until it happens once. Burnside. Burnside was told to operate with Rosecrans, but he decided not to. Until a physical link-up with Rosecrans occurs, the units in the Army of the Ohio will only be allowed to move during the movement phase on a 5 or a 6. If a 5 or a 6 is rolled, then any of the Army of the Ohio can move up to 1 box on the OBD or 1 area on the map, even splitting up. If the Union player forgets to roll, too bad, he can't move them. I mean, it's more you forget you got these units in the off-map box. I think that may have happened to us. Although I don't even remember the off-map box, so we may have played a smaller scenario that didn't have one. I know we didn't finish what we played. Linking up. If Burnside's it was a long time ago, back in the 90s. If Burnside's enters onto the map, or if Rosecrans enters the OBD, and they're both in the same area at the start of a Union communications phase, they have linked up. Burnside's is removed, the Army of the Ohio becomes just the 23rd Corps, a Union formation under Rosecrans, and whoever, Hart Stuff or whatever, is now the Hart Stuff, is now the commander of the Corps. And Burnside's is just kicking around. If Rosecrans enters the OBD and his officers do not, they can't trace command to him as long as this is true, and the reverse is true about Burnside's entering the map. He's got to bring his troops with him if he wants them in command. That interests some interesting things, where Burnside kind of has to clear this map to come onto this one. And honestly, I don't think Rosecrans is going to leave the main map with the Army of the Cumberland. But okay, a couple of special Union units. There's a Reserve Corps. This is treated like any other Union formation, except its units can count as any other unit formation on the battle board and avoid stacking penalties. The restrictions of 11.22 if there's 2 or more officers present in the same wing. I don't know that restriction. And I'm assuming it's off the standard rules. I don't know if these rules go to 11. You get no benefit if there's multiple officers. So if you bring the reserve officer with you, you screw up the command. Okay, and he's pretty decent, so yeah. The Lightning Brigade. There's one special semi-cav brigade. It's basically dragoons with repeating rifles. They're treated like cav for movement, supply, and communications. It may probe or intercept. However, in combat, it doesn't count towards stacking limits in the line position, i.e., neither do cav. It may stack freely with any line position. Its combat strength is not halved like other cavalry units. And it uses its full strength at any time. Okay. So it's just kind of a cool cav. The Confederates. During Chickamauga Campaign, the Confederates had a bunch of problems, including too many generals, none of which liked Bragg. we use that Confederate command chart there, and we'll take a look at it in a bit. So there are 11 Confederate infantry divisions. None of them are associated with a corps. Instead, the way we keep track of which corps they're in is on this chart here, which has each leader with a number of boxes as to how many divisions they can command maximum, and you put the actual division counters in them. Those division counters have two sides to them. They have a trusted and a newly reassigned side. When you first put a leader in there, he's newly reassigned, and you'll see the effects of that. Eventually, he will become trusted, and he understands how to work with his leader. When you shift people, they become newly reassigned. Let's take a look at the special, the effects of that. There's also, though, let's hit some of the other things, a senior divisional officer box, which contains some of the divisional officers, and then there's the corps officers available, and some of them should be in here. I gotta figure this out. Yeah, these officers are sort of not in play. They're not available until something happens. I may have that set up a little wrong. Okay. All the primary corps officers in play must have at least one division assigned to them. Now, here's where it's a little different. Before any senior division officers may have one. That seems to contradict the earlier rule, which is they always have to have troops assigned to them. It may be possible they can't. So I'm going to try to follow the restrictions of both, but yeah. Okay. The Confederate has the option of being able to reassign any of his infantry divisions from one officer to another. All the primary corps officers must be assigned at least one division each before units may be assigned to a senior division officer. Okay, that's really beginning to sound like somebody might not have any, but they could have their troops destroyed under them, and that's why they're not on the map, sort of. However, Army of Northern Virginia must be assigned to Longstreet or to Hood, and the Confederate Army commander, Bragg, has to be in or adjacent to the area that the assignment is happening. So you can't shift troops around without him being present. I gotta swap batteries. Okay. The officer in the division to be reassigned must be in the same area. They have to have started the turn. They may have started the turn in separate areas, but in order to be reassigned during the combat phase, they must have moved to the same area. This can be done during the communications or combat phase, but not the Union combat phase. You put the division's command marker in an open box on the new marker, on the newly reassigned space side, and during communications phase, including just after a reassignment, you're allowed to roll a die for each leader, subtracting 1 from the die roll result. And if the roll is less than or equal to the officer's offensive rating, remember the offensive rating for a leader is the left-hand side value there, they successfully go up to trusted. If you do this during the combat phase, you don't get an immediate roll, and they're just untrusted. And you can only roll once per communications phase per leader. If a division is reassigned, its command marker is on the NR side, in general. Any division in NR attacks at 1/2 its combat strength and defends at 3/4 of its combat strength. A division in TS status attacks and defends at its full strength. However, a division can only check for TS during the communications phase. You can reassign as long as you follow the rules. Okay, wings. When Longstreet showed up, Bragg decided he'd reorganize his army into 2 wings to make things easier and more complicated in the roles. Any corps officer with more than 3 printed boxes on his command chart is eligible to become a wing commander. Other primary corps officers may be assigned to wing commanders. All the units assigned to the wing command count as one formation for stacking on the battle board. Corps officers and their units subordinated to a wing commander must follow divisional reassignment. All new divisions transferred to the wing commander become NR, The wing commander can try to place them in TS using normal procedures. If an officer has all his divisions transferred to a wing commander, he's immediately removed from the game. And placed in a holding box. So by creating a wing, you're not going to create a little army with like 3 officers in it or something like that. Okay. The Confederate player can bring corps officers back into the game by putting a previously removed corps officer in the area containing the wing commander and assigning him at least 1 division using normal reassignment. Some reinforcements enter the game in NR status, but you must assign them to a specific corps. They're not necessarily with that corps, they just get assigned to it, and then they must move towards that officer in question until they link up, at which point they're eligible to achieve TS status via regular rolls. The command status in combat, units from the same formation may occupy the same line position regardless of their current command status. And what they mean there is that NR, TS, you can have NRs and TSs together. Units from different formations in the same line position do suffer as though they're actually different corps. Okay. If your officer becomes a casualty, the Confederates have to name a new officer to command the formation or assign the units to other commands subject to the restrictions on reassigning units. All such units become NR under the new officer they're reassigned to, except if the division and officer have the same name. That's a general rule, which I may have missed, which is whenever you assign an officer his own division, it stays in it is in TS status. It is used to them. The divisions of Hood and Kershaw, as well as Alexander's artillery battalion, were from the Army of North Virginia. They did not arrive altogether at Chattanooga because of the fall of Knoxville. Alexander's battalion didn't make it in time either. All the brigades arrived, as the brigades arrived, they formed into divisions. You only get them if they get maximum reinforcement chit. Okay. And at the start of the Confederate player turn on turn 13, the OBD box is connected by the rail line from Russville to Cleveland. If they're completely unoccupied, this is Cleveland. I don't know where Russville is. Where Russville is. Oh, Russville's over here. So if this entire line is clear of the Union, then on game turn 14, the Confederate player gets Longstreet, Hood, Kershaw, and the artillery at any point along the Russville to Chattanooga or Ringgold rail lines, but not behind Union lines. I don't know what that means. We'll try to keep that in mind. Hood is placed in the senior division pool. If at the start of the Confederate player turn the rail line is cut, things are different. On turn 17, Hood shows up in either Ringgold or Rome, along with his officer. Hood's division is not in automatic TS status to Hood, but has to roll. On turn 18, Kershaw's division, along with Longstreet in NR status, come on the board. And then on turn 19, Alexander's artillery comes in at the area chosen, which I assume I think these all come in at the same area. Note, under this option, the divisions of Hood and Kershaw enter the game in NR. They're treated like any other Confederate Army infantry division. The divisions themselves may not be reassigned to other non-Army of Northern Virginia officers, but must remain under the command of Longstreet and or Hood. Also under this arrangement, Hood will be a senior division leader operating as a corps officer for at least one turn. That's if he comes on the map on his own. The Confederate player is free to use Hood in this position, in which case Longstreet will have to command Kershaw or merge the command at a later point. I would say that Hood is in command of that, even if Bragg, hasn't got all his senior corps officers in command. The Confederate Army Commander Bragg was basically hated. And so they have some order disruption rules. If the Confederate player is the attacker in a combat situation and he wishes to attack using at least one infantry unit, and Bragg's not in the area where the attack's being conducted, then it might not happen. After setting up the units and selecting combat orders, the Confederate player rolls a die. On a 1 or 2, the attack's just canceled, and they go back on the map. This will not apply to the defending Confederates, I hope not, or if the attacking units are just cav or artillery. Forrest. Forrest has 2 cav units, Armstrong and Pegram, who were cool, and they have a little circle on them, and they get +1 to the probe chart, and a -1 to blocking probes if they're involved. You have to reveal them to show them. These 2 combat units are halved in combat against enemy units as is normal, but they can get a 1 column shift to the right on the fire combat table for each of these units that's in the line position. Okay. The Cumberland Gap, somewhere up here, another victory point space. We have a Cumberland Garrison. The box is occupied by the Confederate garrison. The garrison is always in command and in supply as long as it's in that box, and it can't move except to retreat closer to Knoxville. If it does, it's still in command at all times, but it becomes subject to supply rolls. If it's rendered ineffective, it leaves the game. And now I'm curious. Ew. My photocopy didn't come out as good as I thought. Where is it? There it is. Okay, it's got, it takes 2 losses to become ineffective. So, and it's got 3 strength points. So it can become ineffective without being destroyed. That's what I was curious about. Because a lot of 3-point counters last the whole time. We've got weather. It's pretty standard for this system. Heat is +1 to the straggler table. Rain, line of supply is reduced by 1 area. You have to add 1 to the straggler table, and you add 2 on the second consecutive turn of rain. And combat rounds fought in rain have their CICs lowered. I'll be playing with the optional weather instead of the pre-programmed weather. Okay. In order to win the game, the Union has to own a certain number of victory point spaces. The spaces with stars. There's no track for this, but I can keep track of it over there. This depends on what the Confederate reinforcement effort is, which you don't know. If it's minimal reinforcements, you have to take 5 of the stars, but if it's maximum, it's 3. There are modifiers to this. Every 3 ineffective infantry divisions, rounded down, a side has at the end of the game counts against a victory area for that player. 2 ineffective cav units count as 1 ineffective infantry division. The Cumberland Gap counts as an ineffective division. And then, based on the side that has won, use the victory conditions outlined above. The following levels of victory are possible. Now, these are kind of screwy. The winning side has to have the victory areas they need, or has rendered sufficient enemy units ineffective. That's adding in, from what I understand. That's what the wording means there. And has less ineffective units than the opponent has, and has sole possession of either Chattanooga or Knoxville. Okay, that's an interesting list. Both sides can't win it. According to the operational victory, the winning side gets the number of victory areas, or, sufficient ineffective, and has suffered less combat strength point losses than the opposing player. And then finally, the tactical, you just have the victory areas and the modifiers to that. Okay, we're playing the big scenario, the battle, not the Battle of Chickamauga, but the Autumn of Glory campaign. I have set up according to it already. There is a free setup scenario, but I don't want to think about that. Some player's notes. You have to observe the rebels and maybe probe them to see what their degree of victory points are, and force them to spread out by crossing the Tennessee at a number of locations, or use dummies. Once the 20th Corps arrives, I don't know when that is, that's probably this pile, but it might be over here. A drive on Rome is possible. Your supply situation will become relieved once Chattanooga falls. The Reserve Corps is adequate to cover your supply line until you get Chattanooga. Use your cav to tie down the rebel cav and raid towards Ringgold and Rome. The main Confederate problem is deciding whether to be defensive or offensive before you know how much of an army you're going to have. Hanging on to Chattanooga is critical but can be fatal if you get a minimum victory chit. Yeah. Assuming everybody comes, the next problem is getting your divisions entrusted subordinate. Given average luck, the Confederate Army can take the offensive by turn 13 or 14. Don't be afraid of giving up Chattanooga early, although it's critical. No doubt it will be at least mutually controlled at the game's end. Make the Union Army cross the Tennessee downriver, where it will be forced to spread out if they intend to drive on Rome. I'm not sure which way is downriver. I think this way, but I won't guarantee. Okay. Optional rules, and we're going to play with these, whichever ones I have. Forts and fieldworks, entrenchments. Entrenchments can be constructed at any time during a friendly movement phase if the units building the entrenchment consist of at least one. This is the same entrenchments that we had in Mississippi, marching through Georgia. Not Mississippi burning. I don't know what that is. The units building the entrenchments have to have an infantry or garrison unit. They may not move during the movement phase. They do not attempt to recover stragglers, and they don't declare an attack or engage in combat. The supply status doesn't affect them. The presence of other friendly or enemy units has no effect. You can only have one entrenchment marker per stack per area. And the number of entrenchment markers in the supply is a limit. The other player can eat your entrenchment markers because they're shared. I'll try not to do that. That sounds cheap. To identify a unit or stack building entrenchments, you flip a counter, etc. They're removed during the owning player's turn, or if the player leaves the area with friendly entrenchments. Dummies can't occupy entrenchments by themselves. If you had 6 units occupying 2 entrenchment markers and 3 units left the area, you only have 1 entrenchment marker left. The attacker gets no bonus from entrenchments. If the defender is in a line position that has an entrenchment marker on it, you have to position them by line position. Then at the end of each combat round, those units take 1 less combat strength point loss than called for by the CIC and FCRT. But if you're given counterattack orders, you don't get a bonus from it because you came out. Cav and artillery, they can receive the entrenchment benefits even if all alone. If a single stack of units is occupying an entrenchment marker is deployed during the combat phase into 2 or more line positions, then only one of the line positions is in the entrenchment. Chattanooga. Before the campaign began, Bragg had a series of rifle pits connected by lines along the southern perimeter of Chattanooga. To simulate this and the dispute over how effective they are, Chattanooga has inherent entrenchment markers when attacked by units moving from areas 30, 32, 34, 35, or 42. 30, 32, 42, 34, 35, not across the river. That's the key. Okay. Roll it. You don't want to attack across the river. Roll a die during the combat resolution and divide by 2. That's the number of entrenchment markers they have, and that will be that for the rest of the game. Morgan, one of Bragg's dashing cavalrymen. John Morgan managed to lose himself. He had his division destroyed. We're not playing with that. We want to stay with history. Realistic, both sides were more constrained by supply problems than the supply rules simulate. This is where you'd think the mule rules come in? Nope. Until Chattanooga is taken, the Union Army Corps in the Army of Cumberland must trace supply back to its unique home area. For the 14th, 21st in reserve, this is Area 9. For the 20th, this is Area 50. Units may not trace their line of supply back to any other area, and it may not be traced through an area that has not been moved through or is currently occupied by real Union units. We may need to make markers to indicate the path of advance by the Union. You're going to want to spread out and, widen your supply path. And for the Confederates, their line of supply are reduced by 1 from the values that are originally given to further hinder them. The Union ones are probably a great idea. The Confederate ones, that's going to hamper them, but I like playing by more historical. So, what do these mule trains mean? No fucking clue. What are the rules for bringing the Army of Northern Virginia in? I got a whole bag of counters for that. Yep. Like the rest of this series, they add optional rules, and unfortunately, I can't find them online, which is a pity. I really wish somebody would bundle them up. I wouldn't be surprised that Ed Wimble would be fine if anybody had them, because he was fine with printing the base rules and standard rules and publishing those outlined. But on the other hand, if they do have any plans to reprint it, if, maybe some people would feel bad. I mean, it's one thing. You need the game to play the game. I mean, I guess you could print it out yourself or play it on Vassal or something. But, what are you going to do with just the rules? But with these optional rules, you are kind of getting something bonus. It's something bonus from so long ago, though, that I feel like, just make them available. I'd even pay for a PDF. If it was legitimate, if Clash of Arms was willing to release them in PDF form or something, and just say, give us $2. Just, I'd be cool with that, because I feel so bummed. Each one of these games has like a set of counters that I don't know what I can do with. Say it, I went through an hour there in this. I'm going to call this an intro for this one and just load it up, because I can't see actually starting play without, after I've already spent an hour babbling through the rule book. Wow.